Hello and welcome to the Rubber Duck Dev Show. I'm Chris,
I'm Creston.
And I'm Kota.
and we are going to have a fun time today. We're excited to welcome Kota back to the show. We're going to talk about today how to evaluate your software and tech tools, because it's if you actually get a paycheck from this kind of stuff, it's something that you have to deal with at some point in your career. So we figured it'd be fun to, fun maybe not be the right word, but good to talk about it. So we'll find a way to have fun anyway. We usually do. So, but before we get into the meat of that, let's do week in review. Creston, how was your week?
You know what's fun? Spammers! I literally got notified by email not 15 minutes ago. That's why I was so quiet in our pre-show prep work. That the spammers are at it again. Basically, they're pummeling my server, trying to test credit cards and whatnot. Thankfully, the protections that I implemented the last time, or that were implemented last time, are kind of keeping them at bay. But still, it's like, please go somewhere else.
You're not getting in. Go away.
Other than that, I've had some other success in other areas that I can't remember right now, but
they're kind of not front of mind.
Basically, helping clients with stuff, but nothing of significance. But yeah, it's now it's suddenly going to look like the rest of my day is going to be spammer day. Anybody, what about you?
So I had actually a quite busy week. I was doing a lot of work with trying to suss out Sidekick issues at work with very large distributed sets of Sidekick jobs and stuff. And man, those are hard to dig into if you start having problems with them. Cause there's a lot of black boxy stuff happening in those jobs a lot of times. So I spent a lot of time adding more logging and stuff so I could really tell what was going on inside there. But, so that was a bit challenging, but I also finished up, like a first rough draft of the, wave function collapse algorithm for Dragon Ruby. And, Wildfire actually put together a little sample and got it working, which surprised the hell out of me, but he, showed a little sample of a map being built from this thing. So, the algorithm is fundamentally working. So now I started today going through and doing profiling on it so I could try to optimize it because it's too slow. So I think I can do better. And then, there's other things that I want to do to it. But before I got too deep into it, I wanted to profile and optimize what I had. So, lots of exciting stuff going on in the Dragon Ruby world too. Hey, Levi, I dare not tell you that, I'm doing optimization. Listen, I just gotten the profiling done right before the show and I didn't have time to post it, but I was going to give you all the profiling information and let you go nuts, my dude. So don't worry, Levi, you'll get it. So Kota, how about you? How was your week?
Yeah, so on, I think Saturday night, I decided to, work on some things and then what was it? I was trying to use some sort of library or application. Yes, okay. I was trying out some other robot related library and it wanted a newer version of Ubuntu than I had. And well, I figured instead of kind of setting up a Docker image with, all the NVIDIA, GPU CUDA support and things like that, I would just, it's about time that I upgrade anyway. So I went through that and partway through the install, I think because I had upgraded some like Python library, the whole thing died on me. So now I have two hard disks that basically have full disk images of the 3 terabytes of data that I had on my computer, and then and I am running a fresh install. So just like navigating, trying to like talking to like customers with, we had visitors at our company for the whole week that are pretty important customers, and so I was kind of navigating that a little bit, but that went by okay. So So here I am with like a half working system right now. But
Oh no. That's always the fun thing to have happen on the weekend when you're trying to just get a little thing done.
yeah, it was like I think that's always the mistake is like you go to bed and then you wake up at like 2 a.m. and you're like, oh yeah, I'll just do this fun little work thing
Eh,
for a little
Uh-huh.
bit, and that's what happens. So now I know not to do that.
Yeah. 15 minutes, I'll get it out of my head and then I can go back to bed and rest.
Yep.
Yep.
So
Yeah, that doesn't work for me
that
either.
several hours.
Yeah,
Murphy had other plans.
right?
Yeah, exactly. So
Oh man. Well, I mean, the good news is you're smiling about it, so
yeah,
it's
well,
it's still a
that's
good
all you
day.
can do.
What can you do? Yep. Just keep smiling and keep trucking.
Right.
So let's have some fun talking about stuff. Before we do, I just want to say hi to chat. Welcome. Levi, Sire, V. How y'all doing? Glad you're here. Thanks for coming. Make sure to ask questions and give us advice on how we're and by we I primarily mean me am not thinking about this correctly. So we like to hear from you guys. So Kota, we have had a couple of conversations offline about this topic. Not deep conversations yet because we kind of wanted to save that for the show, but on the surface talking about things like, well, what does that mean to evaluate software and tech systems, and when do you decide you need to do that evaluation, and how do you do that evaluation, and what are the different ways you can screw it up and get it wrong, right?
Yep.
So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah. So actually, sort of just a little bit of sort of background in terms of what I do to make sure that to sort of look at things in terms of scoping that I view these things at. So I have I started a little robotics company that I'm a CTO of. I co-founded it with a couple other people, and then so as the CTO of that, and then actually recently got acquired. But as a CTO of sort of this U.S. branch of this other Korean company now, I've been basically doing a lot of evaluation on our technology stack and, in terms of what we want like our customers to see. And also I think like data collection and, all sorts of different things that kind of encompass the whole, stat process from, first, even from just managing sort of the issues that, or, documenting the process of what the requirements of the customers, and also actually developing things to productization and deployment as well. So and then there's a support piece as well. So I mean, I think I've kind of gone through this process many times and made many mistakes through that.
Yeah.
I think the first thing is I think it's very tricky to get right always, and no matter how much work you put into it, there are times where it just doesn't work out, right? So I think it's just a process where, like you said, Chris, where a lot of people go through, or every engineer does some software evaluation, but it's something that I think all of us struggle with.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there aren't a lot of, like if you're doing project management or product management or, different things like that, there's these methodologies that have been developed and posted, and you learn about them, and there's classes for them. There's not really that for software evaluation for a business. So,
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there are a few sort of methods. And if you kind of look online, there are like charts, right, and tables for evaluating
yeah.
these things. But I think the tricky thing about software is, first of all, these aren't, just abstract things that you're dealing with. Very often, it's very environment dependent. So,
Mm-hmm.
it's even sort of like OS or things like that, right? Or what your organizational structure is that can make an impact on it. At what level are you looking at this? So for my decision making on my local tools is very different from my decisions that I make for the sub teams within the company, versus how does that impact things when we're looking at something that's customer facing, right? So it's
Right.
the stringencies and the requirements there are actually very different as well. So and I think, like, all of us, when we're kind of rushing to get something out and our unit tests go away, it's that same same
Yeah.
kind of thing where, depending on what we're doing and how we're thinking, and we're trying to kind of just get something out, it can be tricky to actually make the right decisions then and go through sort of a formalized process at that point.
Yeah. And it's, like you said, it's very, and we kind of touched on this in the pre-show, asking the question about how do you do a software evaluation, there's like 85 different it depends answers to that question, right?
Right.
Team and the level of experience on your team. Like if you're evaluating something for a team of junior developers, that's going to be very different requirements than a team of 25-year veteran developers, right? Because it's a whole lot different experience level. What's the project? What's the biggest thing I've found? Hey Zed, yeah, it depends on all your dependencies. That's exactly right. It's a lot of dependencies of dependencies. But the biggest thing I found is, as I've gone through this in my career, is worrying about how this is going to fit with the team and the team members has bought me more than worrying about how it's going to fit with the project mechanics. Because what I've found is if the team likes it and the team members are behind it, they'll find a way to make it work. And if it's perfect mechanically, but the team members don't like it, it's going to die on the vine. That's just how it is. So,
Yeah.
what have you found for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right there. The biggest example I have of that is our I guess our task management, project management tools.
Mm-hmm.
So like a lot of companies, we start out, I think, with maybe Jira. I think that was where we started, right? And one of the issues that we had was people weren't really using it. We would and it was a small team at the time. I think we were just like 4 or 5 people or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's important to actually be able to keep track of these things to make sure that things are going in the right direction, and also to you know have something to look back on, especially to make sure that you can kind of stay motivated, and you can there's something very satisfying about looking back at all the things that you've achieved, and being able to go through that. But the big issue that we had is just it was really clunky and slow, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we switched over. I think we wanted to have something that gave us a little bit more flexibility in terms of how we broke down teams or something like that. And so we tried like Asana, and we tried, I think there was this one called like Clubhouse.io, maybe something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually we ended up on something called Linear. So it's linear.app. And I don't know if you're familiar.
That's one I
Um,
haven't seen. I've seen a lot of them, but
yeah.
that's not one of them.
So the main thing that has is it's just very snappy. So and it's all just keyboard shortcuts, right? So I'm a longtime Emacs user. We have a few other people who are like Vim diehard engineers, and I think, but essentially for me, like I use of course it's standard keyboard, but I use the Apple keyboard because it has up to an F19,
Mm.
so I can map like the additional function keys in Emacs to all sorts of different things, right? So,
Yeah.
having kind of that snappy keyboard access is really kind of the biggest thing for me.
Yeah.
So while there were a couple things where we said, okay, it doesn't actually handle maybe like the team or like splitting up projects in the way that exactly we had in mind, it fits the needs for our team in every other way, and our team just values things to be snappy and simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so having that to just make sure that our cycle time, and just keeping things that are not directly what we're working on as low effort as possible is very important for at least for our team. And I think generally speaking that's been something that I've noticed. So I think that was a multi-year process, but eventually we ended up landing on something that worked well for us. And I think that probably could have worked a lot better if we had just kind of sat down and really first laid out what was important to us as engineers, what our priorities were. Um,
Yeah,
so
and I think, and that's one of the reasons that I kind of wanted to have this talk and kind of expose these ideas, is because I've seen this over and over, and I've suffered from this over and over, which is there's not a lot of talk about how do you evaluate things, and so everybody just kind of makes it up as they go, and they end up making the same mistakes over and over, you know. Um, and I think you're right. One of the things that I've learned in my career is if you're going to go switching systems of something, project management, Git or code management, any of that kind of stuff, you need to sit down with the team and find out what they want out of it first.
Yep.
Because that does two things. A, it's much easier to get the team to buy in because they had input on shaping what it is we're looking for, right? So it's their idea, not just, the manager's idea. And B, you get to what fits that a lot faster than try this thing for 3 months, then try this thing for 3 months, then try, So,
Yeah.
Well, wait a minute. What about the whole protocol of going through the purchasing office and the whole purchase process from doing RFPs? And because that's a whole protocol and procedure that people follow.
yeah, it is.
Yeah, it exists.
Yes, you're right. It exists.
There's training people do on it.
Yes, but there's there's a problem with that, though. I've always had a problem with that through my career. Every time I've been involved with things with RFPs, it ends up being a whole lot of bureaucratic writing and not a lot of actual analysis of needs. I've never had an RFP that actually helped me figure out a good tool. Every time I've had quick success there, that didn't involve just a lot of trial and error, was sitting down with the people who had to use it and just talking it out, whiteboarding it.
Well, I mean,
So
that's what should be in the request.
one would think, but
But
I mean, I haven't
I'm
seen it,
not
but
going to argue that there's been a disconnect between kind of it's when multiple factions get involved that things get muddy and
Yeah.
potentially inappropriate tools get chosen. Like I know when I was going through the process of looking for something and I would call around getting references for different products. This is when I was doing more in fundraising and looking for a fundraising solution for the institution I was working for. I would ask, okay, so why did you choose this solution? And 99.9% of the time, it wasn't due to features. It wasn't due to what it did. It was because, oh, well, I knew this guy who used it there, or they used this at this other institution. So that's why we chose it. So it was like, so what's the point of calling these people? They're just good. Only reason why they're choosing some is what they've used before.
yeah,
And then been on the flip side doing sales and been in situations where, okay, here's the RFP, go ahead and fill it out. Or it's an RFP light or whatever. Yes, here's the requirements. Did everything. And then I hear back 3 months later, oh, they've chosen this other product. And the people who were working there that I've been working with, because they're still using my product, but not in the capacity that they were actually looking for. It was another module that my product also supported, but they were looking more widespread for it. And they're like, I don't know why they did that. So they were actually angry at the IT department, maybe purchasing. It was like, I don't know why they chose this because we're happy using this, your thing or whatever. And then 2 years later, they switched back to my product. So it was like, I think we could, so I'm saying there are processes and procedures that exist, but then getting the right answer, even though that exists, it's all over the place in terms of success.
yeah,
I mean, it's so often just I find so often the thing that actually fits best is whatever my first gut feeling is, right? And even when you do things, very often that it just ends up being the case. Did you get a sense at all for why some of those users decided to switch back? What was it that
Well, I mean, it was basically the case they had chosen another product, not mine,
right?
and then months later I mean, I don't know the details of why they
Yeah,
didn't like that. I think it had some clunkiness that they were dealing with, and maybe they just had a visceral reaction to like, okay, you're being forced to use this because this is what the process determined. And it was exactly what Chris was saying early on. If your users don't like it, you're going to have a revolt on your hands at some point.
Yeah.
right, right.
So the actual users of the product were the ones that were not happy with the decision
Mhm.
because it was made, I guess it was mostly by IT or the purchasing department, someone who is outside the process. Oh,
Right.
excuse me, outside of the user base using it on a daily basis.
Right. And I think that's an important point that I want to kind of stress here. And because that's where every time I failed at this, that's where I failed. And that is, don't make decisions without talking to the people who are going to use that product. Because all the RFPs and all the specs in the world aren't going to help you if the people using it don't like it. They will go find something else, or they will find ways not to use it. So, and Zed says build consensus before you create the request. Yeah, I don't care which department has to create the request, whether it's IT or management or whatever. They better talk to the people that are going to use it, or they're just wasting their time. And I think a lot of people forget that. Like, this is a prime example. IT goes off and buys this other thing, and the users are like, "What the hell, man? That's not what we wanted."
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually interesting because as I mentioned earlier, we recently got acquired. And through that, there was a big shift in terms of, our parent company has certain things that they want us to be using. Um, and so, and one of the big things that we really emphasized through the acquisition process was there are some things that we need to make sure we can control internally in our team because we have things that work really well for us, right? And there are some things where, sure, I think the switch from Slack to Microsoft Teams, just in terms of being able to communicate that, I don't think there was any way of getting around that.
Yeah.
But sort of actually hearing about from the company that acquired us why they chose Microsoft Teams was also a little bit interesting because really the main motivator there was it's just a single application, right? And so you
Mm-hmm.
don't need to have a few different subscriptions. You can do everything in one. Um, and I think everyone across the board is, or at least everyone who switched from Slack over to Teams, including sort of the Japan team and us, we're pretty much all in agreement that Slack chat actually better for chatting. So for the day-to-day experience is actually a nicer thing. But the essentially the IT group and things like that decided, hey, it's actually easier to only maintain one application. So, and probably cheaper too.
Yeah.
So, there are always kind of competing priorities, which can make it harder, especially as organizations grow. When it's just a few people, then it's pretty simple. But
Right.
Well, it
it's
sounds like another situation of where the losers lost out, essentially.
yeah,
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure people feel different ways versus the two products, but what the scenario is, the reason was chosen because it sounded like it might be easier for IT or whatever.
yeah,
And
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 like
cheaper, which makes it easier for budgeting and. So it's not to say that's not a reason to do it.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But it's just different priorities, and kind of evaluating which priorities are actually the most important is, I think, one of the tricky pieces too.
Right.
Um, and that's something where essentially it just depends on what the priorities of the organization as a whole are, right? So, making sure that we have, in our case, making sure that we have sort of a streamlined single tool chain is is important. And, in part that's because, we have a lot of different groups working in a lot of different countries, and we're sort of trying to coordinate all of that and making sure that across a lot of different operating systems and things like that. So, just making sure that everyone has a unified tool chain for that piece is actually very important for that. And so,
Right.
I think that makes sense.
Well,
And
I think the
actually,
fact that you can articulate that, I think that's the important part. Because if you can say, all right, I get that you guys like Slack better, but we need to go with Microsoft Teams because these business reasons, and we really need to. As long as you can get buy-in from the team for that, I find that they're a lot more forgiving about, okay, yeah, we like Slack, we're used to Slack, but we'll switch because that makes sense to me.
yep,
Yeah,
yeah,
I personally like the reasoning of, or it feels better to me, the reasoning because we need a consistent communication tool for everyone, as opposed to, oh, it's budgetary reasons, or because IT didn't want to deal with multiple licenses or something like,
Or the worst
I
reason of all, that's just what we use. I hate that. Have a reason.
Joe chose it in 1993 and we can't change it.
yeah. But there is a switching cost, right? There's always a big
Mhm.
switching cost, and the longer you use a tool, the higher that switching cost is. So, especially when doing some of these software evaluations where you're actually trying out a couple of these things and seeing what works best, making sure that that time frame is short, and making sure that any decision that you make is made promptly is, I think, pretty important. Preston, I think you mentioned earlier that it took what, did you say a few months, or did you say a couple of years that it took for that set of customers to actually come back to switch back to your tool?
I think it was a year or two or so. So I mean, they may have had a year contract, definitely at least a year contract, if not a little bit more.
Mhm.
But then, you know,
Right.
I don't know exactly what transpired. I mean, I didn't ask too many questions. They're here. It's like, okay, great. Let's get you set up. I'm not going to say, well, I didn't dig into. Oh, well, why are you? So
Yeah. Yeah. That is interesting, though. And that kind of thing happens very, very often, right? So,
I don't know about very often, but we were already had them as a customer, and they were using us for one purpose. It was just this other purpose that we also do. They had chosen another vendor, but they kind of were accustomed to using us, liked using us. So uh, I wouldn't say that happens that often, but it was nice that, okay, they've decided to go ahead and give our solution a try for this purpose. So
Yeah, and I think it's important to keep what I keep learning over and over and in my career is that the thing you've got to keep in mind, number one in your mind when you're making these decisions, if you're in the decision maker's spot for these things, is you have got to understand the psychology of your team and and who's going to be using this stuff, and you better get buy-in from them or they will turn away from it, whether it's the best tool or not. If they didn't get to buy into it and it's forced on them, they'll walk away from it. Doesn't matter how good it is. To a point. I mean, it's
or
not
they
like they're
may
going to say I
silently
quit and I don't want a paycheck anymore because you picked this tool, but they will, start deep sixing and undermining and all kinds of
Yeah, I was gonna say
crap.
silent sabotage,
Yeah.
potentially.
right.
Um,
Yeah.
so, one of the things that I was kind of interested in, at the pre-show we were talking a little bit, and one of the things I asked, because I am kind of curious about this, I'm not really sure I have an answer, is when is it relevant to do evaluations like this for stuff? Because, like the example we brought up in the pre-show, if I need to calculate this thing on a spreadsheet, I just grab the nearest spreadsheet. I don't need to do an evaluation for that, right? At what point do I need to invest this time?
Yeah, and that's a good question, right? And I think a lot of it is how much, it all depends on how much time you're spending doing that thing. um, and also how irritating the thing is, or I think the large part is also how much the ecosystem has changed, right? Or I was talking to, we have a contractor that we work with, and he was talking about how in the JavaScript world everything moves fast, and you always kind of need to stay on the latest framework and the latest thing. But I was kind of thinking a little bit, that's you're spending so much time just sort of building out the same things in a lot of different worlds, and it feels like it's a lot of wasted time that way. And I don't know if
Hmm.
that really makes sense, and always kind of chasing the greatest, or at what point do you kind of settle for a while and say, okay, this works for now, maybe we'll evaluate it again in a few years. But being able to just kind of make that decision and sort of sit with it is something that's important too, and sort of making that, it looks like different people at different organizations have a very different idea as to what that looks like, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people kind of associate that also with a fast-moving organization versus a slow-moving one, which isn't always necessarily true either. Um,
And not always necessarily beneficial or the best way to do it either. Sometimes moving fast is problematic. I mean,
right,
sometimes you got to, or you miss the opportunities, but sometimes if you go too fast, you blow past the opportunities and miss those too. Like, and you brought up a good example, like the JavaScript framework stuff. That's one of the reasons that I grew to just absolutely hate JavaScript. It's not because of the language, it's because the framework of the week kept changing, and I got tired of trying to keep up with it. And so it was like, well, I just don't want to do that stuff anymore. So if that's the tool that you're going to force me to work with, I'm going to find some other work, right? Because I just I just don't want to do that stuff. Um,
Yeah, I don't know how JavaScript got in this position, but literally it feels like the ground is shifting from under your feet every choose your period, every week, every couple of weeks, every month or whatever. It's really strange. And you're right, Coda's right in that there's a huge cost to still stand up on that shifting sand. Whereas there's other things that are more stable, like, well, I'm the database guy, but Postgres, SQL doesn't change fundamentally. I mean, that thing moves slow as molasses.
mm-hmm.
So it's like once you learn things, you could keep using them for a long time, or you choose particular tools. A lot of times they stay a long time, but this JavaScript stuff changes like crazy.
right. I think one of the big things there as well, there's kind of an argument in allowing other people to make those decisions for you, right? In the sense of choosing sort of a higher level tool where that is around for a long time, that you can reliably say, has been around for a while and will continue to be here for a long time, where, a lot of those kind of part pieces might change a lot, but the main thing that you interface with stays static, and that I think is very powerful, where you can still kind of use a lot of the latest and greatest tech, but from a higher abstraction level. And so that's often sort of the kinds of things that I tend to look for, at least, that have worked pretty well, since I don't want to be switching from thing to thing every day.
Yeah.
So
So we talked about a little bit, where do you start thinking about this stuff? I want to go to the other end now and kind of ask, and again, there's no real answer for this. There's a whole lot of it depends, but what are some of the signs that kind of tell you, okay, I've done enough evaluation, now it's time to make a decision and I'm comfortable with this one?
yeah, so I mean, I think that's a good question. For us, a lot of it is just, we have, in the case of, for example, tooling that the team might use, right? Then we have people use it for a little bit and see if there's traction. We might use the free trial for a few days and essentially just see if people seem to to actually enjoy using it, and if people do, then that's what we pick on. But usually it's kind of with a smaller subset of a team, right?
Hmm.
And then to try to kind of get as much feedback from everyone as possible. I think the big thing is also it's so important to look at what sort of, with open source projects, at least a lot of these things can kind of die overnight. And so having, making sure that you're using things that are actually popular enough that even if it's not the thing that exactly fits, there might be some product B, open source project B, which is a better fit but isn't very popular, then that might not be the right thing to use,
Hmm.
unless you're, willing to spend resources on maintaining it yourself. But um, yeah, I mean, I think that's always another piece where just kind of sitting down on a decision and making sure that you've kind of evaluated an option that's good enough is, it's tricky, but
Yeah. Well, and I think too that it's kind of important to keep in mind too that, you know, if you're evaluating something for yourself, for your personal development use and stuff, the switching costs of that aren't typically terribly high.
Mhm.
And the evaluation process is usually fairly short because you know exactly what you're looking for. But when you're doing it for a team, that's a whole different set of evaluation criteria because now you've got a lot more brains and styles of working and ways of thinking that you've got to take into consideration for these things. And every member of the team that you add increases that cost of switching that you're talking about. So how much, when you're looking at things, not for your personal use, but if you're looking at switching systems and evaluating systems for a team, how much reliance do you put on the team themselves to do that evaluation?
I mean, I think that goes back to what you were saying earlier, right? It's ultimately you need the buy-in from the team and from the users there. So, ultimately, I think the decision should be made based on what they feel like is, the key users, the main people using the application should be the ones who actually end up making that ultimate decision. And sort of as the job of, the manager or whoever basically making the final decision, the main thing there is to kind of guide that, right? Is to lay out the different options that are acceptable for the organization as a whole, whether that's from a price point perspective, or maybe it's the license, or whatever else it is. But from there, just once we have kind of a narrow list of things that are acceptable for some reason, then it really ultimately should be up to the team that's using it as to what ends up being used or what ends up being adopted.
Right. So hey, Magi, welcome. Yes, we've got Coda here in real life. Amazing, isn't it? It's fun. I love having him here. Um, so have you experienced, I'm kind of digging into the horror stories here. Have you experienced a decision like this that you've made after an evaluation for some kind of system or tech tool that your team revolted on you and said, "Yeah, this is no."
Wait, give me 1 second. I'm sure it's happened. Well, I mean, I think the big one was the Jira, right?
Mm,
And that was early on, but that certainly happened. But I imagine there was something more recent. There are always those tools that you kind of float by and they just never get used. And at that point, you say, okay, well, if it doesn't get used, then it's not actually, something that we need. First of all, it's not something that we really, it's not a need that we have, but also, clearly they don't like it. But
right.
um, yeah, but I do think like the really key thing there is when this kind of goes into sort of hiring, but really, the first of all, the reason we hire experts in various things. So, I work for a robotics company, so we have people who are like, sensing experts or algorithms experts or things like that. And really, the key thing there is that we're hiring them not, because we want them to just kind of do what we tell them, but because they have the insights that can help make the product and the company and the, everything better, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if they can solve the problems that, might be just in the one area that they have, but also usually they have insights into a much wider range of things. And picking that brain is so critical. And then I think the other bit is, very often when we're actually evaluating talent, we look at, there's two people one who's very, very technically savvy and one who might not be quite as good from a technical perspective, but seems to be a better fit culturally, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so making sure that we have, diverse perspectives are very important as well, but within that, making sure that you have people who are easy to work with and easy to reason with can really help prevent that kind of issue with really people kind of revolting from the technology stack or from software tools or whatever else it is that you're using. Um, mhm,
Yeah, and I
yeah.
think you bring up a good point there, is that there's a lot of what's involved in these evaluation processes. And I see a lot of people take this for just, kind of a mechanical evaluation. But a lot of what needs to be involved in this evaluation is the corporate culture, the things that that you bring in from these people, and the fact that you hire these people based on how well they fit your culture, and how they contribute to the culture is a big part of telling that, that's an important part of things you need to look at. Almost everything every decision in the business needs to do some looking at corporate culture, but especially for the tools that the people are going to use. So I think that's a good point.
Yep. Yeah. Um, so, and it's always kind of interesting because we've had we always of course have employees who are very, very excited by the tooling, right? And we have other people who just say, hey, I don't really care what we use, I just want to make sure I want to build this cool thing. So there's
Right.
kind of this big trade-off as well there, which is, and kind of navigating that and saying, hey, I know you're excited about this piece of tech, but maybe we should wait off on this until we can until it's really something that we need, is an
Yeah.
important part of that.
Yeah, and I know I've been kind of guilty of that in my career too. I see this hot whiz bang tool, and I look into it and I get all excited about it, and I take it and I say, we got to use this, and then they're like, why? What what problem are you solving? I'm like, oh yeah, well, it looks cool, so that's and that's another good point, is what problem are you solving? If you spend all this time evaluating something and you're not actually solving a problem, what you know why? Why'd you go there?
So one thing that we do, and I know a lot of teams do this, and I'm sure the places that you've worked at or places that you currently work at do similar things, but having sort of that regular retrospective. So
Mm-hmm.
at a kind of monthly cadence, we go back and look at everything that we've been doing, and really the main thing that we look at are sort of the blockers, um, kind of in terms of how we structure, how we do our work. Um, and so that's really kind of where sort of the initial needs and requirements come out, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we do these retrospectives, and maybe there's an issue that we talk about in one retrospective. We have some action plan for it, but it doesn't really seem to get resolved. And after that's happened a few times, then we say, okay, maybe this is an actual problem that we need to kind of dive into a little bit more deeply. And that's really kind of when a lot of these tool questions come into play.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I think the it's kind of important to look at it not from the, oh, there's this cool new thing, which sometimes that is a little bit valid, right? If it
Yeah.
really is something that you're lacking, then it can be very valid, and important. But a lot of the times, the most critical things, since you only have a finite amount of time, you don't want to be evaluating everything under the sun. So those things really kind of come out of those patterns that you see, and a lot of that kind of comes from those kinds of reflections as well.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because I've worked at jobs that didn't do those kind of retrospectives, and it was that kind of thinking of let's find a problem to solve, or let's create a solution for a problem we don't have, right? Because we're not actually keeping track of what problems we have. And then I've worked at ones that do have retrospectives, and that's much more efficient because you don't. Where am I losing time? Let's fix that because that's the one thing I can't make any more of. Right? I can make more money. I can make more widgets. I can't make more time. So let's find ways to improve that loss.
I wish I could always make more money, but
Well, I mean, not saying it's easy.
Chris has solved economics.
Yes. Just, there you go. But yeah, it's, I think that's a good point too, is you got to figure out what it is you want to start evaluating, because you can't evaluate everything. You can't solve every problem. And I think a good way to figure out what do we look at is have the team say, this is where we have problems. Because as soon as you do that, the team's already bought into, yes, let's find a solution here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I think the other place that the tools, evaluation kind of comes from is one-on-ones, right? So we have a lot of, the one-on-one meetings, and I try to have those with, with everyone in the organization with some cadence and some length, but that's so important, right? Because understanding the individual needs, and always I try to make sure to ask, hey, what problems are you having? That what are your blockers right now? What's preventing you from working more efficiently, or happier, or just in terms of kind of that, making sure that people are feeling like they're being very productive, and making sure that they don't have those roadblocks, is so important. So, usually it starts either from there, or the retrospectives, or the contents of the retrospectives comes from the one-on-ones to some degree. So it's, I think, like you say, it's always kind of the people that are involved that's important, and really also kind of evaluating the needs of the people before we even talk about, oh, we need a tool. The idea that we need a tool has to come from the team and from the people
Right.
who are actually doing that work.
Right. And as well as what should this tool look like needs to come from them too. So I also have found that actually getting the team to evaluate the tools, and don't leave that up to some person in the office doing the evaluation. Let them evaluate it. Because, then they make the decision, yeah, I want it. And once they make that decision, they'll use it.
I think there's also scenarios, of course, where sometimes a tool is important for the business that may run counter to some of people's jobs. Like if you're used to doing a manual process and you come in every day and this is what you do. You go in and you do X and Y and Z, but then there's a disruptive tool on the market that eliminates having to do X, Y, and Z manually. And now you click a button and it does X, Y, and Z. Well, now suddenly this, so asking this person who does it manually to say, hey, do you need a tool? No, I come in and I do this. So I think there's also a little bit of a counterpoint in there that sometimes the arrival of new technology or presence of it can make the business more efficient. That may override some people if it means it impacts significant parts of their job. But
right.
Yeah.
And we're, at a point right now where that's especially true, right? Where, we're seeing like Chat GPT and things, and that's already starting to, take away some of the, like, a lot, especially I think some of the service related or sort of customer facing, the chat window that you have on a lot of websites, that kind of thing, and I think a lot of the, it hasn't happened yet, but more, I think the junior level engineering jobs will also kind of start to fade out a little bit, maybe based on that as well.
I'm
I
sorry,
don't think
could
we're
you
quite
repeat
there
that?
yet.
Could you repeat that last
Yep.
phrase you just said about the junior engineer, because you dipped, at least in my listening.
Okay, yeah, apologies about that. So I think also, we're not quite there yet, but some of the junior level engineering roles, some of that I think is coming pretty soon, where we don't necessarily need someone to just sort of fill out, you some of the part pieces, and really, I think pretty soon it's going to be the case where when you hire on a junior, it's really because you expect them to get to that senior engineering position, rather than just having someone. I think a lot of those kinds of jobs will start to fade away a little bit. But
Yeah.
And by engineering, are you talking about software engineering or a different type of
mostly
engineering?
software engineering, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and Creston, I think you bring up a good point, is that the wants of the team have to be tempered by the needs of the business. So there has to be a bit of push-pull there, because if the team just goes haywire and drives the business into the ground with their wants, then you don't get a paycheck because there's no business. So, I mean, there has to be, a bit of synergy there. But I haven't run into that problem, because usually you can tell the team, okay, this is a great idea, I love it, but it's problematic because da da da, and they'll say, okay, well, let's find a different solution then. But where I've seen all the problems is from the other side, where management says, I'm making this decision without asking the team about it, and the team says,
unilateral stuff.
yeah, this decision sucks, I'm not going to do it. Right? That's where I usually see the problems. But you're right. Businesses are there to be businesses, not to just make everybody feel good. So, you have to kind of temper those decisions a little bit. But
yeah, and I think, though, the case where it can just flat out replace certain rules, where you can replace the whole rule with technology, that also, I think my business, at least, we're so focused on kind of the R&D kinds of work, and in a way where we haven't really run into that yet. But that of course I think requires a much more careful evaluation of those
yeah,
tools, because especially if even from uh, just business perspective, let's say you adopt a new tool and you fire all employees that that it replaces, but then you find it doesn't work quite the way you expect it to, then you've just laid off your staff that would be doing that for you, solving those problems. And so I think that's always tricky. But even while you're evaluating it, of course, those employees know that's what you're doing. So
yeah,
it's tricky, I
it,
think.
it does get tricky. And I think too that, like you pointed out, this chat GPT, the AI and stuff that may start replacing some jobs. I will say that, back in the 70s and 80s, people said the exact same thing about robotics. And what ended up happening is, yes, robotics replaced a lot of assembly line jobs and things, but it also created different jobs. For instance, yours. So I think even when new technologies come around and you do those evaluations, you look for ways to shift that knowledge and shift those people to different places than replacing them so much. If you're smart, right?
Yeah, I mean, just there have been a lot of cases these days where you look at, in even in sort of pretty mainstream news, where there are articles about people basically being replaced by ChatGPT, and I think that's one of those cases where we probably aren't quite there yet, right? Where the
Yeah.
technology probably isn't quite there yet, but because there's so much hype, people are kind of making these rash decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, I would not trust ChatGPT to write code for me. I've seen some of the code, and it's nice to get ideas from, but oh my God, it's so full of security holes. It's no thanks. I'd rather have a person thinking through that. Tools to help, great, but I don't want the final arbiter of good code to be ChatGPT, because it's learning from good code and from bad code. It doesn't know the difference.
Pretty soon it's just going to be learning from itself, right? Because there's going to be so much code out there that's just from it. So
yeah. So hey, Poto, welcome to the show.
The answer that exists in Stack Overflow, and then everything will be fine.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry, we're a bit on the tangent here, but what I found was interesting. I mean, what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about jobs being supplanted is looking at like what's happening at, say, restaurants, maybe the more fast food variety, as well as grocery stores, where they're introducing kiosks to place an order, or you could still go to the person. So it's kind of, they're introducing the technology, but still keeping, of course, people around. But at some point it's going to flip.
Yep.
But you kind of have both. So now when you go to a grocery store, you could choose self-checkout, or you could have someone still check you out. But so they're kind of introducing the new way, the new tools, as well as keeping the old. But at some point, the transition will continue. So that's a way not to do it as a scorched earth policy, but maybe give more people time to transition to different roles and whatnot. But yeah.
And using that example, I mean, the introduction of that new technology also created new jobs, because now you have the job of the attendant that helps people with their self-checkout issues that didn't exist before that technology. So, that's a good example of, okay, well, let's shift this human value to a different place. Still valuable, just
and then you've got the additional security officers or whatnot as well to monitor things.
So we are right up on time. So I really enjoyed this conversation, Kota. Thank you so much for coming and being with us. And I'm looking forward to finding another topic to get you back on here to talk some more, because I really enjoyed talking to you. So, chat, thank you for being here as always. Thank you for participating. Love to see you folks here. And I hope you had a good time. If you did, and you want to help the channel, the best thing you can do is like, subscribe, comment, follow if you're on Twitch, and even more than that, tell your friends and bring them too. We love to talk about all kinds of things in the dev world and the business world. So anybody with any kind of dev or business interest might find something they like here. So make sure you tell your friends to come and join us. We have next Thursday on the show, we've got Poto coming to talk to us about my brain just went blank. What did I title that thing, Creston? You look it up. I don't have it up. Anyway, world simulation. Yeah, there we go. I'm there. It's late.
Your brain is faster than my fingers.
Yeah. So, looking forward to that. That's an interesting thing. So I'm looking forward to having that conversation and meeting Poto. I haven't gotten a chance to meet him yet. So, that's fun. Game of Life and Birds. Yeah, could be. Yep. Next show is you, man. And then the week after that, we don't have a lineup yet, but I'm working on some things. So, we will let you know. Make sure you keep tuned in either to Twitter at Ducky Dev Show, or to our Discord, or to the DR Discord, because I announce all the stuff on there. And quite frankly, I do more stuff on the DR Discord than my own. So probably theirs better. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that. We will see you next time. Creston, are you here tomorrow doing live coding?
Yes.
Okay, so tomorrow at 4, coding with Creston. We get to, go point fingers and laugh tomorrow, and then you get to do that to me on Tuesday. And we will just keep going from there. So we will see you next time, and until then, Happy coding.
Happy coding.
Bye.
Happy coding. Yep. Bye.